I'm standing in front of my house in Oakridge, Georgia, when Linda Grayson storms up the driveway, a rifle slung over her shoulder like she's the neighborhood overlord. Her face is flushed red, maybe from the summer heat or the anger she's trying to hold back. I hear her yell something about unauthorized property modifications, but honestly I don't care much about the words. What catches my attention is the gun. Last I checked, HOA enforcers didn't carry firearms, unless she's planning to start some bizarre self-appointed crusade. I step out, leaning against the doorframe, hands casually in my pockets, eyes sliding over her before settling on the rifle. Linda's trembling. Like that weapon's the confidence she never really earned. I raise an eyebrow, staring her down with a long, mocking look. Really, a gun for my driveway? I call out, voice thick with sarcasm. You know I've gotten complaints about the lawn before, but this is next level. What's next? You gonna shoot me for parking wrong too? Linda's eyes widen, her grip tightening on the gun. You think this is a joke? She snaps, her voice high-pitched and shaky. I'm not playing around, I'm enforcing HOA rules, and you've made a serious mistake. I let out a dry laugh. Oh, I must have messed up big time, I reply, my tone dropping low. But the real mistake is thinking you can march onto my land with a gun like some neighborhood vigilante. Linda puffs out her chest, clearly convinced the rifle's enough to intimidate me. You've been violating HOA rules for months, she shouts. I'm here to put an end to it. You modified your property without approval. That's a direct violation. I glance over at my little house, the slightly wild lawn, my pride and joy. She doesn't know I'm Sheriff Daniel Harper, Oakridge's chief of police, and I'm not about to tell her. Not yet. Linda Grayson stood there, rifle still clutched in her hands, eyes blazing like I'd just insulted her entire family tree. I stayed leaning against the doorframe of my house in Oakridge, Georgia, hands in my pockets, keeping calm even though my mind was already calculating every move. She'd just finished yelling about my HOA violations, the little shed in the backyard, the uncut lawn, and the fence I'd painted gray instead of the ivory white in the aesthetic guidelines. I glanced over my property, a modest tidy house with some wild grass growing free. To me it was home, to Linda it was a crime begging for punishment. You done yet, Linda? I asked, voice even but with a hint of mockery I didn't bother hiding. Because if you're gonna shoot me over the shed, at least let me brew some coffee first. She took a deep breath, clearly not used to being challenged. You don't get it, Harper, she snapped, stepping closer, the gun's barrel twitching slightly. The HOA has the right to enforce rules. You think you can ignore them? You're wrong. I'll fine you for these violations, and if you don't comply, I'll make sure you're out of Oakridge. I smirked, barely holding back a laugh. Linda Grayson, with her dyed blonde hair and outdated office attire, looked like a fired bank teller trying to cosplay a neighborhood cop. I knew a bit about her. Former manager at a small Atlanta bank, lost her job after the financial crisis, then channeled all her failure into controlling this neighborhood. Oakridge was a quiet suburban town, streets shaded by oaks and lined with classic American homes, but under Linda's grip, it felt more like a prison. You talk like the HOA's the law, I said, stepping off the porch, closing the distance between us. But last I checked, the law doesn't include showing up armed at someone's house to intimidate them. Or did I miss a memo from the board saying the Oakridge HOA's now an armed militia? Linda blinked, stepping back a bit, but still clinging to her smugness. The HOA has the right to protect the community from people like you, she barked. You've been breaking rules for months, the shed, the lawn, the fence. I'm here to end it. I tilted my head, locking eyes with her. You know, Linda, it's cute you think a gun's gonna fix everything. But tell me, what makes you think you can barge onto my land like this? She didn't flinch, just kept ranting. The rules allow me to. You'll be fined, and if you don't pay, I'll sue you out of here. Oakridge doesn't need rule breakers like you. I let her talk, watching how her hands gripped the gun tighter, sweat rolling down her forehead, even though it wasn't that hot. Linda was too confident, too drunk on the power she'd given herself. I knew her game. Oakridge residents whispered about her absurd fines, her threats of lawsuits over a misplaced flower pot. But she didn't know I was Sheriff Daniel Harper, who'd been quietly watching her for a year now. Interesting, I said, voice dropping low, taking another step forward. But if you're planning to run me off with that gun, you should know who you're dealing with. Linda scoffed, clearly thinking I was just a stubborn nobody. You don't scare me, Harper, she shot back, voice shrill. The HOA has the power, and I'll make you regret this. I stood still, letting the silence stretch, eyes locked on hers. Linda knew nothing about me, not the sheriff's badge in my back pocket, not the complaints I'd logged from neighbors. She thought she had the upper hand, but I was steps ahead. And as she opened her mouth to yell more, I decided it was time to drop the bomb. But not yet, I wanted her to dig her own grave first. Linda Grayson finally left, rifle still slung over her shoulder, but her steps slowed like she'd just realized I wasn't as easy to break as she thought. I stood on my porch in Oakridge, Georgia, watching her disappear behind the shady oaks lining the narrow street. Her shouts about HOA rules still echoed in my head, but I just shook it off, heading inside. Rex, my old mutt, lifted his head from the living room rug, giving a weak tail wag like he was asking what just happened. Just an annoying woman with a gun, Rex, I said, patting his head. Nothing new. I'm Daniel Harper, Dan to most folks, sheriff of Oakridge, a small suburban town tucked between Georgia's cornfields and oak forests. My house isn't much, a single-story cabin, sloped roof, with a slightly wild lawn and that little shed Linda just lost it over. I like it that way, simple, comfortable, no fuss. I was a Marine, bouncing through a few war zones, before settling here 6 years ago, chasing a quieter life. Being sheriff in a place like Oakridge usually means handling petty theft or family spats, but Linda and her damn HOA were making things messier than I'd like. I sank into my armchair, sipping cold water from a glass on the table, eyes drifting over the stack of mail on the shelf. There, among the utility bills, was a warning letter from Linda's HOA last week, about the uncut lawn, the wrong-colored fence, and the unapproved shed. I smirked, tossing it aside. I'd known about Linda for a while, beyond just her letters. Neighbors murmured to me at the grocery store, or on patrol, how she fined them over nonsense, how she threatened lawsuits if anyone pushed back. Maggie Turner, the single mom 2 houses down, told me about a fine for her kid drawing chalk on the sidewalk. Earl Jenkins, the old gardener at the street's end, got banned from growing tomatoes for landscape violations. I'm not the type to pick fights, but Linda picked the wrong guy to bully. I pulled open a drawer, grabbing the small notebook where I'd logged everything about her, dates she'd come threatening, complaints from residents, even the time I caught her sneaking a hose from my well to water the community garden. She thought I didn't know, but I'd been quietly tracking her for a year. Linda wasn't just a nuisance, she was a bigger problem, and I had the proof to show it. Rex yawned, flopping down beside me. I scratched his ear, staring out the window where the afternoon sun filtered through the oaks. Linda might come back with that gun, but I wasn't worried. I'm the sheriff, and I was ready to show her her mistake, just not yet. The next morning, as dawn peeked through the oaks in Oakridge, I heard urgent knocking. Rex lifted his head from the rug, growling softly, but I already guessed who was out there. I opened the door, and sure enough, Linda Grayson stood there, no gun this time, but still glaring like she wanted to devour me. She wore a threadbare beige office outfit, clutching a stack of papers, probably more pointless HOA crap. Daniel Harper, she said, voice icy, you really think you can brush me off yesterday? I leaned against the doorframe, hands in my pockets, scanning her up and down with a faint smile. Morning, Linda. I'm guessing you're not here to invite me for coffee, right? She huffed, thrusting the papers up like they were evidence in a Supreme Court case. This is an official HOA notice, she snapped. Your lawn's too long, the fence is the wrong color, and that illegal shed in your backyard, all violations. You've got 7 days to fix it, or I'm fining you $500, no negotiation. I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. $500? Generous of you, Linda. I figured you'd demand the whole house. She narrowed her eyes, clearly not liking my tone. You think this is a joke? She barked, stepping closer. Oakridge has standards, and I won't let people like you ruin it. Who do you think you are, defying me? I chuckled softly, stepping off the porch to face her. Just a guy living here, Linda. But tell me, what gives you the right to boss me around on my own land? Linda puffed up, smugness oozing. The HOA rules give me that right, she shot back, triumphant. You signed the contract when you bought this place, Harper. Don't like it? Why not move somewhere else? I tilted my head, meeting her gaze. Interesting. But I don't recall the part of the contract saying you can barge in here with a gun to scare me. Or is that a secret clause only you know about? Her face stiffened for a second, but she quickly regained her arrogance. Yesterday was to show you how serious I am, she snapped. You've ignored my warnings for months. I'm not letting this slide. I nodded slowly, like I was mulling her words. Truth is, I knew those letters. They were in the pile on my table, right next to the notebook tracking her every move. Linda thought I was some lazy nobody who didn't care, but she didn't know I'd been watching her since Maggie Turner told me about the chalk fine, or when Earl Jenkins nearly got sued over his tomatoes. You're serious, all right, I said, voice dipping into sarcasm. But if you think I'll rush out to mow the lawn, or repaint the fence just because of your threats, you're mistaken. Linda's face flushed, her hands crumpling the papers. You'll regret this attitude, she hissed. I'll send the fine, and if you don't pay, I'll sue you out of Oakridge. This isn't my first time, Harper. I let the silence hang, staring her down. I knew she wasn't lying. She'd forced a family out last year over unpaid fines, a story neighbors still whispered about at the grocery store, but I wasn't them. Go ahead and try, Linda, I said, voice cold. But you should be careful. Not everyone in Oakridge is as easy to bully as you think. She sneered, turning on her heel and storming off, leaving the papers scattered on the driveway. I picked them up, glanced over them, a bunch of HOA nonsense. Rex waddled out, sniffed the pile, then yawned. Exactly, Rex, I said, patting his head. She doesn't know she just kicked a hornet's nest. I'm Sheriff Daniel Harper, and Linda Grayson was about to learn a hard lesson. Linda Grayson stormed off, leaving the crumpled HOA papers on my driveway in Oakridge, Georgia. I scooped them up, skimmed the dense lines about landscape violations and fines, then tossed them in the trash by the door. Rex, my old mutt, watched me with sleepy eyes, like he was saying he was tired of Linda's games too. I patted his head, stepped inside, but my mind wouldn't let go of her. Linda wasn't just a pest to me, she was a nightmare to this whole neighborhood, and I'd seen enough to know it. That afternoon I drove my patrol car through Oakridge, a routine check to keep things in line. The town's small, just a few oak-lined streets and southern-style wooden homes, but under Linda's thumb, it felt stifling like a jail. I pulled up at Maggie Turner's place, 2 houses down from mine. Maggie, a single mom in her 30s, was picking up her kids' toys in the yard, a red plastic wagon Linda once fined her for ogling up the neighborhood. She looked up, waved, but her smile couldn't hide the exhaustion. Linda send you another letter? I asked, stepping out of the car. Maggie sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. No, this time it's for the kid drawing chalk on the sidewalk, she said, a bitter edge to her voice. $50, Dan. I don't know how I'm gonna pay it anymore. She says if I don't, she'll sue. I frowned, jotting that down in the small notebook in my pocket. She really thinks chalk's a crime? I asked, sarcasm creeping in. Maggie shrugged. To Linda, everything's a crime if it's not her way. I just want to raise my kid without hassle, but she won't let up. I nodded, scanning the street. A few houses down, Earl Jenkins, a 70-something retired, was watering his backyard tomato plants, the ones Linda threatened to sue him over for ruining the landscape. I walked over, finding him muttering about damn lunatics. Hey Earl, I called, leaning on his wooden fence. Linda bugging you again. He stopped watering, squinting at me in the sun. You got that right, Dan, he growled. She sent a letter telling me to rip these out, or pay $100. I'd grow 'em to eat, not to decorate her damn eyes. I let out a dry laugh, but inside I was pissed. Earl's a harmless old guy, lived in Oakridge his whole life, and Linda acted like she owned the town. She mentioned suing you yet? I asked. Earl nodded, pulling a crumpled paper from his pocket. Says if I don't pull him in 3 days, she's taking me to court. I can't afford a lawyer, Dan. She trying to starve me or what? I took the paper, skimmed it. More HOA garbage. Don't worry, Earl, I said, folding it up. I'll handle this. On the way back, I stopped by Rosie's grocery store, where Oakridge folks gather to gossip. Rosie, behind the counter, shook her head when I mentioned Linda. She fined the brown kid for leaving his bike out, she said, voice thick with disgust. $25, Dan. He's 10. and the Carters got run out last year, 'cause they couldn't pay her fines. Linda's turning this place into hell. I nodded, adding those details to my notebook. Sitting in my patrol car, I stared through the windshield at Oakridge's peaceful homes, but that peace was just a facade. Linda Grayson and her HOA had spread fear through everyone, from Maggie and her little girl, to Earl with his tomatoes, to families no longer here. I knew she wasn't stopping at petty fines. She'd been sneaking water from my well for the community garden. I caught it from a spiked water bill and a hose sticking out back. That wasn't just an HOA breach, it was illegal. I started the engine, drove home, hands gripping the wheel tight. Linda thought she could bully the whole neighborhood, but she didn't know I was Sheriff Daniel Harper. I documented everything, every complaint, every threat, every shady move. She wanted a power game. Fine, I'd show her who really held the law in Oakridge. A few days after patrolling Oakridge and hearing from Maggie, Earl, and Rosie, Linda Grayson decided to up her game. I was on my porch, sipping morning coffee, when a white pickup pulled up at my driveway. A guy in a polo shirt and sunglasses stepped out, camera in hand, snapping shots of my house, the lawn, the fence, that little shed Linda despised. Rex growled from inside, but I signaled him to stay, standing up and walking out. "Hey buddy," I called, voice calm but sharp. "What are you doing on my land?" The guy glanced at me, shrugged like I was a minor nuisance. "Taking pics for the HOA, he said, not stopping." "Got a complaint about this property," I smirked, stepping closer. "Who ordered it?" "Linda Grayson." He nodded, still clicking away. "Yeah, she said document all violations. Talk to her if you've got a problem." I nodded slowly, hands in my pockets, watching him work for a few seconds before saying, "Thanks for the tip. But next time you step on my land without permission, I'll call it trespassing." "Clear." He paused, gave me another look, then muttered something and climbed back in his truck, driving off. I went inside, grabbed my notebook from the drawer, and wrote April 12th, Linda hired someone to photograph property, without consent. It wasn't her first overstep, but she was clearly escalating. That afternoon, another HOA letter hit my mailbox, an official demand to dismantle the shed in 48 hours, or face a $1,000 fine, and legal action. Linda wasn't playing anymore, she was going big. I tossed the letter on the table, laughing dryly. "Who does she think she is, Rex?" I asked the dog, but he just yawned, flopping on the floor. That night, I decided to confront her head-on. I drove to Oakridge's only coffee shop, where Linda often sat with her HOA cronies, flaunting her power. Sure enough, there she was, in her usual beige office getup, jabbing at a stack of papers with two others. I walked in, ordered a coffee, and sat at a nearby table, close enough for her to notice. Linda glanced over, her smile vanishing. "Harper," she said, voice frigid. "What are you doing here?" "Just grabbing a coffee, Linda," I replied, taking a sip, eyes locked on her. "But while I'm at it, care to explain why some guy was photographing my land this morning?" Her face tightened briefly, but she regained her smugness fast. "That's HOA business," she snapped. "You're breaking rules, that shed's unapproved. I need evidence to deal with you." I tilted my head, voice dripping sarcasm. "Evidence? You mean trespassing on private property, without a warrant?" Didn't know the HOA doubled as cops now. Linda flushed, slamming her hand on the table, startling her two companions. "You think you're so smart, Harper," she yelled, loud enough for the whole shop to hear. "I gave you chances to fix this, but you ignored them. Now deal with the consequences. That shed's coming down, whether you like it or not." People in the shop turned, whispering, but I stayed cool. "You sure about that, Linda?" I asked, voice low. "Because if you keep this up, you won't like how it ends." She scoffed, standing and stalking over to my table. "You don't scare me," she hissed. "I've run tougher people than you out of Oakridge. Who are you to defy me?" I let her stand there, meeting her gaze, saying nothing more. Linda thought I was just some stubborn resident, but she didn't know I was Sheriff Daniel Harper. I'd logged it all, the photographer, the threatening letter, her showing up with a gun. Linda went back to her table, ranting to her crew, but I saw her hand tremble as she picked up her coffee. She was rattled, even if she hid it. I stood, dropped a few bucks on the table, and left. Driving home, I knew one thing for sure: Linda was pushing too far, and I wouldn't let her win. Not in Oakridge, not on my land. I drove back from the Oakridge coffee shop, the dim streetlights cutting through the oaks, my mind still buzzing with Linda Grayson's smug tone. She thought she was untouchable, but the way her hand shook holding that coffee told me she wasn't as sure as she acted. I pulled into my driveway, killed the engine, and sat there a minute, hands still on the wheel. Linda was taking it too far: the photographer, the threatening letters, the gun stunt earlier. I wasn't just mad she was targeting me. I was mad she was targeting everyone in Oakridge, and I'd seen too many bullies like her push people around without consequences. I'm Daniel Harper, Dan to most folks, Sheriff of Oakridge, Georgia, but I haven't always been the guy behind the badge. Before this, I was a Marine, serving 2 tours in the Middle East. I've seen power abusers, high-ranking officers forcing grunts into unpaid overtime, or local warlords extorting villagers just because they had guns. Once in a dusty village near Baghdad, I watched a self-proclaimed elder beat a man for not paying enough protection tax. I stepped in, nearly got disciplined, but I didn't regret it. I left the Corps after that, tired of injustices I couldn't fix. Oakridge was where I chose to start over. A small, peaceful town where I thought I could protect people instead of just watching. 6 years ago, I took the sheriff job, bringing Rex, a mutt I picked up from a rescue on the way back to Georgia. I bought this wooden house, with its wild lawn and gray fence, because it was mine. No one could order me around on this land. But then Linda Grayson showed up, turning Oakridge into her personal power playground. She wasn't just a nuisance. She was a smaller version of the tyrants I'd faced, and I wouldn't let her keep going. I stepped inside, Rex wagging his tail from the rug. I sat in my armchair, pulled open the drawer, and grabbed my notebook. Every detail about Linda was there: her gun stunt, the photographer today, complaints from Maggie and Earl. I'd logged it all, not because I love paperwork, but because I knew people like Linda only fall when you've got undeniable proof. She thought I was a stubborn nobody, but I'm the sheriff, and I learned in the Corps that the best way to take down a power abuser is to let them dig their own hole deeper. Linda wasn't just threatening me, she was threatening the community I swore to protect. Maggie couldn't raise her kid because of petty fines. Earl couldn't grow tomatoes to get by. The Carters got driven out for not paying fees, Linda made up. And then there's the well. I caught her sneaking a hose from my private well to water the community garden, a move that's not just an HOA violation but illegal under Georgia law. I'd let her run loose too long, but no more. I stood peering out the window into Oakridge's darkness. Linda wanted to escalate. Fine, I'd faced worse than her, and I always won by staying calm, gathering evidence, and striking when they least expected it. She didn't know who I was, didn't know the badge in my back pocket, didn't know I was ready to end her game. I patted Rex's head, smiling. She's about to learn a big lesson, Rex, I said, and I'm the one teaching it. A few days after the coffee shop confrontation, I knew Linda Grayson wouldn't stop. She'd sent the photographer, threatened fines, and now she was plotting something bigger. I sat on my porch in Oakridge, Georgia, with Rex beside me, as the afternoon sun turned the oaks golden. The birds' chirping was cut off by the sound of boots stomping up the driveway. I looked up, and there was Linda, rifle slung over her shoulder, face red like she was about to combust. She wasn't here to talk anymore, she was here to fight. I stood leaning against the doorframe, hands casually in my pockets, eyes sliding from her furious face to the gleaming barrel in the sunlight. From a distance, I heard her shrill yell, "Daniel Harper, you've gone too far. Unauthorized property changes, ignoring my notices, who do you think you are, defying the HOA?" I raised an eyebrow, staying calm though my mind ran through every scenario. Linda was trembling, but not from fear. The gun seemed to fuel the confidence she never really earned. "Really, Linda, a gun for my driveway?" I called out, voice thick with sarcasm, echoing through the quiet neighborhood. "I've gotten flack for the lawn before, but this is an upgrade. You gonna shoot me for parking wrong too?" Linda's eyes bulged, her grip tightening on the gun like I'd just poured gas on her fire. "You think this is a joke?" she snarled, her high-pitched voice shaking as she stepped closer. "I'm not kidding, Harper. I'm enforcing HOA rules, and you've made a serious mistake crossing me. I let out a dry laugh, stepping off the porch, closing the gap between us. Oh, I must have messed up big, I replied, voice dropping low, eyes locked on her. But the real mistake is thinking you can storm my land with a gun like some neighborhood enforcer. Linda puffed out her chest, the barrel twitching as she pointed it straight at me. You've been breaking HOA rules for months, she screamed, her voice cracking with rage. That shed, the lawn, the fence, I'm here to end this. You modified your property without approval, that's a direct violation. I glanced at my little house, the wild lawn, gray fence and shed, where I kept my tools. To me it was home. To Linda it was an excuse to swing her power around. You serious, Linda? I asked, voice cooling. You think I'll grovel over the shed? Or are you gonna shoot me to prove your point? She took a deep breath, knuckles white on the gun. The HOA has the right to enforce rules, she hissed. If you don't comply, I'll make sure you're out of Oakridge, even if it takes this. I took another step, now just a few feet away, voice low and dangerous. You talk like the HOA's the law, but last I checked, the law doesn't let you show up armed at someone's house to intimidate them. Or did I miss a memo saying the Oakridge HOA's now an armed militia? Linda blinked, sweat rolling down her forehead, but she didn't back off. You don't get it, Harper, she snapped, voice shaky but aggressive. I gave you chances to fix this, but you ignored them. Now face the consequences. I tilted my head, staring into her eyes, letting the silence stretch. Linda was too confident, too drunk on her self-appointed power. She didn't know I was Sheriff Daniel Harper, didn't know I'd documented her every move, from sending the photographer to stealing my well water. I'd let her run free too long, but it was time to end it. You know, Linda, I said slowly, it's cute you think a gun'll scare me, but you should ask what gives you the right to stand here, on my land, with that in your hands. She sneered, stepping closer, the barrel less than a yard from my chest. The rules give me that right, she growled. You'll be fined, and if you don't pay, I'll sue you out of here. I've done it before, and I'll do it again. I let her yell, watching her tremble despite her bravado. Her hands were sweaty, the gun wavering. She was losing it, and I knew the moment had come. I reached into my back pocket, slowly pulling out my sheriff's badge, holding it up in front of her. The sunlight glinted off the metal. You should put that gun down, Linda, I said, voice ice cold. You're talking to the sheriff of Oakridge. For a split second, her face flickered, eyes wide, mouth agape, like she couldn't process what I'd said. The gun dipped a few inches, but she stammered, What, you're the sheriff, you're just some guy, huh? I cut in, stepping closer, voice heavy with mockery. Tell me, Linda, how'd I get this badge? Been sheriff here 6 years, but I guess I slipped under your radar, huh? Sneaky me. Linda paled, hands shaking hard, the gun nearly slipping. You can't, she mumbled, voice breaking. I stood still, staring her down. I can and I will, I said. You've crossed the line, Linda. Trespassing, threatening with a firearm, that's not HOA rules, that's a crime. And I've got enough evidence to lock you up. Linda stumbled back, eyes darting like she was looking for an out, but there was none. I heard patrol sirens in the distance. Backup was coming, just as I'd planned. She didn't know, but I'd called them the second I saw her storming up with the gun. Linda Grayson thought she owned Oakridge, but now she was just a crumbling mess. I smiled to myself. She was about to learn that bullying the wrong guy comes with a price. Linda Grayson stood there, the rifle trembling violently in her hands, as I held my sheriff's badge up to her face. The Oakridge afternoon sun glinted off the shiny metal, reflecting into her wide, stunned eyes. You're talking to the sheriff of Oakridge, I repeated, voice like ice, taking another step to drive it home. Her face went pale, lips moving but only spitting out disjointed sounds. You can't, she stuttered, clutching the gun like it was her last shred of power. But that gun wasn't a weapon anymore, it was a weight, dragging her into the pit she'd dug herself. Can't what, Linda? I asked, sarcasm slicing through the heavy silence. Can't be the sheriff, can't arrest you for trespassing and armed threats, or can't know everything you've done to Oakridge. She stumbled back, her foot catching on a tree root jutting from the driveway, nearly falling. The gun dropped lower, barrel pointing at the ground, but she still clung to her shattered confidence. You're lying, she screamed, voice shrill and panicked. You've got nothing on me. You're just some guy, huh? I cut her off, stepping closer, voice thick with mockery. You're so right, Linda. Just a guy who's been sheriff here 6 years, a guy who's logged every time you threatened me, from fine letters to that photographer this morning. A guy who knows you've been sneaking a hose from my well to water your precious community garden. Linda's eyes widened further, like I'd just stabbed through her arrogant shell. What? She mumbled, voice cracking. How do I know? I finished, voice dropping dangerously low. I'm the sheriff, Linda. I don't just sit around while you bully this neighborhood. I've got spiked water bills, the exposed hose out back, and statements from neighbors about how you find them over nonsense, chalk drawings, tomato plants, kids' bikes. You thought you were clever, but you've just been digging your own grave. Linda shook her head, sweat streaming down her forehead, hands shaking so hard the gun rattled. No, you can't prove anything, she yelled, but the desperation in her voice gave her away. I let her stand there, panicking and stammering, as the patrol sirens grew louder. I'd called backup the moment I saw Linda storm up with the gun, a quick call to Deputy Sarah Wells, my partner, before stepping onto the porch. I knew she wouldn't stop, and I needed her caught live, gun in hand on my land. Now she had no way out. You should put that gun down, Linda, I said. Voice calm but sharp, backup's coming, and I don't think you want resisting arrest added to your list. Linda whipped her head around, hearing the sirens echo from the street's end, her face going white as a sheet. You called the cops, she whispered, voice trembling. You think I'd let you wave a gun around and do nothing? I shot back, smirking. I am the cops, Linda, and you just made yourself a criminal. The gun finally slipped from her hands, clattering onto the driveway, with a dry thud. She clutched her face, staggering back, muttering something incoherent, maybe a plea, maybe a curse. 2 patrol cars pulled into the driveway, red and blue lights cutting through the dusk. Deputy Sarah Wells stepped out of the first, hand on her holster, eyes scanning Linda then flicking to me. Everything good, Sheriff? She asked, voice steady but alert. All good, I replied, nodding toward Linda. Miss Grayson here decided to bring a gun to my place to teach me about HOA rules. Think she needs a break at the station. Sarah raised an eyebrow, glancing at the gun on the ground. Real bright idea, she said, motioning for 2 other officers to move in. Linda spun around, eyes wild like a cornered animal. No, you don't understand, she screamed, voice breaking. I was just enforcing rules. He broke HOA laws, the shed, the lawn. I have rights. Sarah stepped forward, voice firm. Ma'am, you don't have the right to threaten anyone with a gun. Step aside, let us handle this. Linda stammered, flailing as an officer, moved to cuff her. This is a mistake. I didn't do anything wrong, she wailed. But no one listened. I stood there, hands in my pockets, watching Linda get escorted to the patrol car. She twisted back, eyes red, snarling at me. You'll regret this, Harper. This isn't over. I shrugged, voice cool. I'm sure, Linda, but you should worry about yourself first. The car door slammed, and the sirens blared again as they drove off. Sarah walked over, holding the bagged rifle. She really thought she'd get away with this, she asked, a hint of disbelief in her tone. She thought she was the law in Oakridge, I said, watching the car disappear. But I've got enough. Well, water, fines, now this gun stunt. She's done. Sarah nodded, smiling faintly. You let her bury herself, huh, Sheriff? Yep, I said, heading back to the porch. People like Linda always dig their own holes. I just sped it up. Rex poked his head up from inside, wagging his tail as I stepped in. Linda Grayson was down, but I knew she wouldn't stay quiet. I sat down, opened my notebook, double-checking everything. This wasn't just a personal win. It was the first step to freeing Oakridge from her damn HOA, and I wasn't done yet. Linda Grayson was hauled away, the patrol sirens fading down Oakridge, Georgia's oak-lined street. I stood on my porch, watching the red and blue lights vanish into the dusk, hands in my pockets, a quiet satisfaction creeping in. Rex wagged his tail from inside, tilting his head, like he was asking if it was over. Not yet, Rex, I said, stepping in and sinking into my armchair. Linda might be in cuffs, but I knew this wasn't the end. She was a symptom, not the disease. Her damn HOA was the real problem, and I had enough evidence to tear it apart. Deputy Sarah Wells stayed behind, setting Linda's rifle, now in an evidence bag, on my kitchen table. "She's nuts, Sheriff," Sarah said, sitting across from me, chin in her hand. "Bringing a gun to your place over HOA rules. I've never seen confidence that stupid." I smirked, opening the small notebook I'd kept for a year. "She's not just stupid, Sarah," I replied, flipping through pages of tight scrawl. "She thought she was untouchable. But I've been tracking Linda and this HOA for a while. Today was just the tipping point." Sarah raised an eyebrow, eyeing the notebook. "What have you got in there?" she asked, curiosity lacing her voice. I slid it across the table, pointing to the detailed entries. "Everything," I said. "Dates she sent me, fine letters for the lawn, the time she hired that guy to photograph my land without permission, and the well. Linda's been sneaking a hose from my private well to water the community garden. I've got spiked water bills from 3 months back, photos of the exposed hose out back, and a water system map proving she had no right to do it." Sarah whistled, flipping through pages. "This is illegal, Dan, not just HOA stuff, this is property theft." "There's more," I went on, voice lowering. "I've got statements from residents. Maggie Turner fined $50 for her kids' chalk on the sidewalk. Earl Jenkins nearly sued over his tomatoes, $100 just to keep them. Rosie at the grocery store told me about the Brown kid, $25 for leaving his bike out. And the Carters, run out of Oakridge last year, because they couldn't pay fines Linda invented." Sarah shook her head, eyes narrowing. "She's running the HOA like a racket." "Exactly," I said, standing to grab a glass of water from the cabinet. "But that's not all. I suspect Linda's not alone. She's got cronies on the HOA board, those folks I saw at the coffee shop. I've recorded some of their meetings secretly, on my phone. They talk about hiking maintenance fees for a reserve fund, but no one knows where the money goes. I think they're embezzling, Sarah. And I've got preliminary proof. Neighborhood maintenance bills doubled in 2 years, but the roads are still potholed, and the community garden's overgrown, except where Linda waters it with my supply." Sarah nodded, voice serious. "If you're right, this isn't just nailing Linda for the gun, it's taking down a whole system. What's your next move?" I took a sip of water, staring out the window as darkness swallowed Oakridge. "I'll send it all to the DA's office," I replied. "Bills, recordings, statements, everything. But first I want the residents to know the truth. Linda didn't just threaten me, she threatened them all. I'll call a community meeting, lay out the evidence, show them how rotten this HOA is." Sarah grinned faintly, tapping the table. "You're going big, Sheriff. But if Linda's got allies, they won't sit still. She's locked up, but the others might hit back." I nodded, setting the glass down. "I know, that's why I need you to dig deeper. Check the HOA accounts, see where the money's flowing. I suspect her brother Tom Grayson is involved. He's a lawyer in Atlanta, and Linda's bragged about her connections. If he's behind this, I want them both down." Sarah picked up the notebook, flipping back a few pages, then nodded. "All right, I'll start with the bills and accounts. If there's a money trail to Atlanta, we'll nab Tom. But you sure, Dan, this is a big fight, and Linda won't stay quiet in jail." I smirked, glancing at Rex yawning on the rug. "I'm sure," I said. "I've faced worse than this in the Middle East. Linda and her HOA are small-time pests compared to what I've seen. I won't stop until Oakridge is free." Sarah stood, grabbing the evidence bag with the rifle. "Then let's get to it," she said, heading for the door. "I'll take this to the station, process the paperwork for Linda's arrest. You prep for that meeting. The residents need to know you've got their backs." I nodded, watching her go, then turned back to the notebook. I flipped to the last page, where I'd logged the day Linda showed up with the gun, the day she handed me the kill shot to take her down. I stood, stepping onto the porch, gazing at Oakridge's night sky. Linda was down, but I knew this HOA ran deeper than her. I had the evidence, well water, fines, recordings, and I'd use it to smash this oppressive system. Maggie, Earl, Rosie, and everyone here deserve to live without being bullied. I swore to protect them when I took this badge, and I don't break oaths. Linda was step one, now it's the rest of them. I smiled to myself, patting Rex as he joined me. "We're about to get busy, Rex," I said. "Real busy." Linda Grayson's arrest was 2 days ago, and Oakridge, Georgia, was still buzzing like a kicked hive. I stood on my porch early morning, sipping coffee, watching the oaks sway in a light breeze. Rex lay beside me, sniffing the air, like he sensed the shift in town too. Word spreads fast in a small place like this. Linda storming my place with a gun, me revealing I'm the sheriff, her hauled off in cuffs. I heard whispers at Rosie's grocery yesterday, caught curious stares from neighbors while patrolling. But I wasn't done. Linda was the start, and I needed Oakridge's residents to rise with me to finish this dot. At noon I stopped by Maggie Turner's house, 2 doors down from mine. She was wiping down windows in the yard, her little girl running circles with a piece of chalk in hand, no longer afraid of fines. Maggie looked up as I approached, her smile brighter than it'd been in days. "Dan, I heard everything," she said, voice tinged with excitement. "She really brought a gun to your place, and you're the sheriff. Why didn't you tell me?" I shrugged, grinning faintly. "I like keeping things simple, Maggie, but now you know. Linda's done, but I need your help with something." Maggie frowned, setting the rag down. "Help with what?" she asked. I pulled my notebook from my pocket, flipping to her page. "I'm holding a community meeting soon," I replied. "I've got proof. Linda fined you for your kid's chalk, Earl for his tomatoes, and a dozen others for nonsense. I want you to tell your story to everyone. They need to see how bad this HOA is." Maggie blinked, hesitating, but then nodded. "All right, if it helps stop Linda's games, I'll do it." Next, I swung by Earl Jenkins' place. The old man was watering his tomato plants in the backyard, looking more at ease than ever. "Dan, you're a hero," he called, when he saw me, a cracked grin on his wrinkled face. "Heard Linda got cuffed right in front of your house. Serves her right." I chuckled dryly, leaning on his fence. "Thanks, Earl, but it's not over yet. I need you at the community meeting tonight. Tell them about the tomato mess, how Linda threatened to sue you over them. Folks need to hear it from you." Earl nodded instantly, clapping my shoulder. "You say it, I'll do it, Sheriff. I'm even thinking of throwing a barbecue to celebrate." That night the Oakridge Community Center was packed. I stood before the crowd, about 50 residents, from Rosie to young families, new to town, with my notebook and a stack of papers in hand. Maggie and Earl sat up front, nodding encouragement. I cleared my throat, starting. "I'm Daniel Harper, Oakridge Sheriff. 2 days ago, Linda Grayson brought a gun to my house because I challenged her HOA, but that wasn't her first overstep. I've got evidence. She secretly tapped my well to water the community garden, hit you all with absurd fines, and might have embezzled HOA funds." The crowd murmured. I held up water bills, a recording from an HOA meeting I'd secretly taped, and a list of fines. "Maggie," I called, motioning her up. She told her chalk fine story, voice shaky at first, then firm as people nodded in sympathy. Earl went next, holding up a tomato, making the room laugh. "She wanted to sue me over this," he shouted. "I won't let her win." Applause broke out, but not everyone was happy. A man stood from the middle row, Jim Carver, once Linda's pal. "Sheriff, I don't deny Linda went too far," he said, voice tight, "but are you sure? What if she's right, that you broke rules? The HOA keeps this place stable." I smirked, firing back. "Stable by running the Carters out for unpaid fines, by letting roads rot despite doubled fees? I've got proof, Jim. Linda didn't stabilize, she exploited us." Jim sat face red, but a few others nodded my way. Rosie stood, voice trembling with anger. "I saw the brown kid cry over a $25 fine, Dan. If you can stop this, I'm with you." Applause roared again, louder. I raised a hand, calming them. "I've sent evidence to the DA's office," I said. "Linda'll face charges, but the HOA's more than just her. I need you with me to take Oakridge back." The crowd went quiet, then erupted in agreement. Maggie smiled at me. Earl waved his tomato, like a trophy. But I saw wary eyes, folks scared of what'd come after Linda. I knew they had reason to worry. Linda might be down, but this HOA ran deeper, and I suspected her brother, Tom Grayson, wouldn't let it slide. I stepped off the podium, patting Maggie's shoulder. "Thanks," I said. She nodded. "No thank you, Sheriff. I walked outside, staring at Oakridge's night sky. The community was rising, but I knew the fight wasn't over. Linda was one piece, now I had to face the whole puzzle. 3 days after the Oakridge community meeting, the town still felt taut as a wire. I sat in my office at the station, Rex at my feet, when Deputy Sarah Wells walked in with a stack of papers. "Linda's out on bail, Dan," she said, dropping them on my desk. "Got out this morning. Just got word from the precinct." I raised an eyebrow, sipping cold coffee. "That was quick," I replied. Voice even but edged with sarcasm. "Guess she's not planning to sit tight for trial." Sarah nodded, sitting across. "Nope, a lawyer from Atlanta picked her up. I'd bet it's her brother, Tom Grayson." I nodded slowly, flipping through my notebook, now thicker since Linda's arrest. Oakridge was catching its breath after her shock, but I knew Linda Grayson too well. She wasn't the type to lose without a fight. I'd sent evidence, well water, fines, recordings, to the DA's office, and they were building a case. But Linda in cuffs didn't mean she was out of moves. "What'd you find on the HOA accounts?" I asked Sarah. She slid a paper over. "A $10,000 transfer to an Atlanta account, labeled legal consulting. I'm tracing it, but if it's Tom, he might be helping Linda hit back." That afternoon, driving home, still mulling Tom Grayson, a sleek black SUV parked right in my driveway. Linda stepped out from the back, no longer smug, pale hair messy, but eyes still spitting fire. Beside her was a tall man in a gray suit, arms crossed. Tom, I figured. I parked, stepped out, hands in pockets, eyeing them with a faint smile. "Linda," I said, voice level. "Thought you'd rest after jail time. What's with bringing your brother now?" Linda marched forward, jabbing a finger at my face, voice shaking with rage. "You think you've won, Harper," she snarled. "You're wrong. I'll sue you for abuse of power, slander, and false arrest. You'll lose your badge, your house, everything." Tom put a hand on her shoulder, pulling her back, voice low but sharp. "Easy, Linda," he said, then faced me. "Sheriff Harper, I'm Tom Grayson, Linda's attorney. We've got evidence you entrapped her, forced her into this. Drop the charges, or we'll see you in court." I laughed dryly, stepping closer. "Entrapped her?" I asked, sarcasm. "You mean letting her freely bring a gun to my land, freely yell about HOA rules, and freely crash when I flashed my badge? I've got proof, Tom. Well, water she stole, illegal fines, recordings of her plotting embezzlement with the HOA board. She dug her hole, I just pushed her in." Linda flushed, yanking free from Tom. "You're lying," she screamed. "I did nothing wrong, you're the lawbreaker." Tom narrowed his eyes, voice icy. "We've got witnesses, Sheriff. HOA members will testify you broke rules, and Linda was protecting the community. She might have overreacted, but you had no right to treat her like a criminal." I shrugged, meeting his gaze. "Witnesses, fine. I've got statements from Maggie Turner, Earl Jenkins, Rosie. The whole town knows Linda ran the HOA like a racket. And that gun. 2 deputies saw her threaten me. Want to play lawyer, Tom? Go ahead." Linda stepped back, face paling, but Tom didn't flinch. "You're too confident, Sheriff," he said. Tone menacing. "We've got resources." Linda didn't act alone. "The HOA has backers, and they don't like you meddling. Back off, or you'll lose more than your badge." I tilted my head, smiling faintly. "Resources? You mean embezzled HOA funds Sarah's tracing to Atlanta? I'm not scared of you, Tom. And I'm damn sure not scared of Linda." Linda roared, lunging at me, but Tom held her back. "You'll pay, Harper," she shrieked, voice breaking. "This is my neighborhood." I stood still, watching her thrash. "Not anymore, Linda," I replied. "Oakridge isn't yours." Tom dragged her to the car, shooting me a final glare. "See you in court," he said, slamming the door. The SUV peeled out, leaving dust in the driveway. I went inside, Rex wagging his tail. Linda was counterattacking from jail, but I was ready. Tom might be a sharp lawyer, but I had the truth, and Oakridge behind me. 2 weeks after Linda Grayson and her brother Tom threatened me at my house in Oakridge, Georgia, the trial hit the county courthouse. I sat in my station office that morning, reviewing papers with Deputy Sarah Wells. "You ready, Sheriff?" Sarah asked, sliding a stack over: water bills, recordings, resident statements, and the gun report. I smirked, standing to pull on my uniform jacket. "Been ready," I replied, patting Rex at my feet. "Linda wants to go big. I'll show her the cost of picking the wrong fight." The Oakridge courthouse was small, room for a few dozen, but today it was packed. Maggie Turner, Earl Jenkins, Rosie, and dozens more sat behind me, eyes lit with hope. Linda sat at the defense table, hair tied back, face pale but clinging to confidence. Tom Grayson, in an expensive gray suit, stood beside her, whispering. I sat at the witness table, hands in pockets, giving them a faint smile. Linda wanted to countersue me for abuse of power, but I knew she had no shot. Judge Harold Tate, an older man, banged the gavel to start. "Case of Linda Grayson versus Daniel Harper, and vice versa," he declared, voice deep. Day A. Ellen Hayes went first. "Your Honor, we charge Miss Grayson with illegal firearm possession, trespassing, and resource theft, specifically water from Sheriff Harper's well. We've also got evidence of HOA fund embezzlement." Tom jumped up, objecting. "That evidence is flimsy, Your Honor. My sister was enforcing HOA rules, and Sheriff Harper entrapped her for personal revenge." Ellen turned to me, nodding. I stood, walked to the witness stand, raising my hand to swear. "I'm Daniel Harper, Oakridge Sheriff," I began. Voice steady. "On April 15th, Linda Grayson brought a gun to my property, threatening to shoot me for refusing to dismantle a shed she claimed violated rules. I've got 2 deputies as witnesses, Deputy Wells and Officer Carter." I set the bagged gun on the table, with the scene report. Tom squinted but stayed quiet. "There's more," I went on, sarcasm creeping in. "I found Linda tapped my private well for the community garden, spiked water bills for 3 months prove it. I've got photos of the hose, a water system map, and Georgia law showing its theft." The crowd buzzed. Linda flushed, whispering to Tom. I held up the next stack. "She fined Maggie Turner $50 for chalk drawings, Earl Jenkins $100 for tomatoes, all illegal. And I've got recordings of Linda plotting, with the HOA board to hike fees for a reserve that never helped the neighborhood." Tom stood, voice cold. "Sheriff, you broke HOA rules first. Linda was protecting the community. You had no right to arrest her like a criminal." I tilted my head, smiling faintly. "Protecting with a gun, Tom. Or by running the Carters out for unpaid fines. I've got statements from 15 residents about Linda's extortion. And that HOA fund." Deputy Wells traced $10,000 to your Atlanta account, labeled legal consulting. "Care to explain?" The courtroom went dead silent. Tom paled, stammering. That's baseless," he shouted, but Judge Tate banged the gavel. "Quiet, Mr. Grayson. Sheriff, proceed." I nodded, setting my notebook down. "I'm sheriff to protect Oakridge, not to let Linda and her brother turn it into a cash cow. Everything I did was legal. She walked into her own trap." Ellen called Maggie and Earl up. Maggie told her chalk-fine story, voice shaky but steadying as she went. Earl waved a tomato, yelling, "She wanted to sue me for this," making the room laugh. Tom tried a HOA member as a witness, but the guy just mumbled Linda was kinda strict, too scared to defend her. Linda slumped, hands trembling, knowing she'd lost. Judge Tate reviewed the evidence, banging the gavel after 20 minutes of deliberation. "Linda Grayson is guilty of illegal firearm possession, theft, and embezzlement," he declared. 2 years in prison, no parole. Her countersuit against Sheriff Harper is dismissed." Applause erupted from the residents. Linda collapsed on the table. Tom clutched his head, avoiding my eyes. I walked out, Maggie and Earl clapping my shoulder. "Thank you, Sheriff," Maggie said, eyes shining. Earl laughed loud. "I'm grilling tomatoes to celebrate." I nodded, watching them go, but Sarah pulled me aside. Dan, just got word from the DA's office, she whispered. They found more HOA transfers. Tom's in deeper than Linda. He might be planning payback. I shrugged, eyeing Oakridge's blue sky. Let him try, I replied. I took Linda down. Tom's next, if he doesn't wise up. Residents crowded around, thanking me, but I knew the fight wasn't over. Linda was convicted, the HOA dissolved, but Tom was still a threat. I patted Rex as he bounded from the patrol car, smiling. We won, Rex, I said. But we're not resting yet. Days after the trial, Oakridge, Georgia, finally breathed some free air. I sat on my porch one cool evening, sipping a cold beer. Rex sprawled beside me, yawning in the sunset glow tinting the oaks gold. Linda Grayson was locked up with a 2-year sentence. Her damn HOA disbanded after residents voted it out at a community meeting. Maggie Turner didn't worry about chalk fines anymore. Earl Jenkins grew tomatoes freely, and Rosie told me yesterday the grocery store was busier than ever. Folks were celebrating. I took a swig, glancing at the driveway where Linda once stood, gun in hand, face red, voice shrill. Now it was quiet, just a soft breeze rustling the wild grass I still hadn't mowed, and didn't plan to. I'm Daniel Harper, Oakridge Sheriff, and I'd kept my oath to protect this place, like I did in the Middle East. Linda thought she could bully me, bully the neighborhood, but she picked the wrong guy. I smiled to myself, patting Rex. We did good, Rex, I said. He wagged his tail, eyes half closed. But I knew it wasn't truly over. Deputy Sarah Wells called this morning, updating me on Tom Grayson, Linda's brother, the Atlanta lawyer. He's laying low, Dan, Sarah said over the phone, voice cautious. But the DA's office found more HOA transfers to his account, over $20,000 in the past year. He's in deeper than we thought. I nodded, though she couldn't see. Keep tabs on him, I replied. If he moves, I want to know. Tom didn't show at the trial after Linda's conviction, but I sensed he was plotting. He'd threatened me at my house, that I'd lose more than my badge, and I didn't take threats from a guy like him lightly. I set the beer down, standing to look out at Oakridge's darkening road. Linda might be beaten, but Tom was a different snake, quiet, dangerous, and flush with cash. I wouldn't be shocked if he hired someone to stir trouble here, or tried flipping Linda's case. I'd sent evidence to the DA, and they were digging, but I knew Tom wouldn't sit still with his sister in jail, and the HOA cash machine smashed. Rex stood, whining as a strong gust blew through. I glanced down the driveway, a chill running up my spine, not fear, but a hunch. My phone buzzed in my pocket, an anonymous text flashing. This isn't over, Harper. I smirked, pocketing it. I know, I muttered, staring at the night sky. Tom wanted to keep this game going. Fine. I'd taken Linda down with evidence and patience. If he wanted a shot, I was ready. I sat back, patting Rex again. We're not resting yet, Rex, I said, voice low but firm. Linda was down, Oakridge had won, but Tom Grayson lurked in the shadows. I finished my beer, smiling. He doesn't know who he's messing with, I whispered. The fight was just starting, and I wouldn't lose. The story HOA Linda pulled a gun on me for questioning her authority on my property, unaware I'm the sheriff, mirrors real issues in today's American life, especially the abuse of power in homeowners associations, HOAs, and the value of standing up to injustice. In the U.S., HOAs are often set up to maintain order and property values, but it's not rare for them to become tools of oppression, like how Linda Grayson fined Maggie Turner for her kids' chalk, or threatened Earl Jenkins over tomatoes. These details echo real stories on social media, where residents face absurd fines for trivial things, like door paint colors or grass height, reflecting a truth that unchecked power can turn into tyranny even in small communities, like Oakridge. The lesson from Sheriff Daniel Harper's tale isn't just patience and preparation, like how he quietly logged evidence of Linda tapping his well or her illegal fines, but also the strength of a united community. Dan didn't fight alone, He leaned on Maggie, Earl, and Rosie to expose the truth at the meeting and trial, showing that in America, where individualism often reigns, collective action is still key to tackling abusers. Modern U.S. life, with its growing polarization and discontent, teaches us that instead of silently enduring, like the Carters being driven out, gather proof, find allies, and use the legal system, as Dan did with the DA's office. Practical advice: if you face a Linda in your life, maybe an overzealous HOA manager, a power-tripping boss, or an unfair system, be persistent like Dan. Don't rush to react but build your case, document carefully, seek support from others affected, and trust the law's power. Tom Grayson, with his revenge plot, reminds us victory's never total, but like Dan on his porch with Rex, always be ready for the next fight, because protecting a community outweighs personal comfort. Thanks for following the story of the battle with Linda and the Oakridge HOA. Hit subscribe so you don't miss Tom Grayson's revenge in the next video. We're thrilled to share Sheriff Dan's journey with you. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and catch the next part to see how Oakridge faces its new challenge.